tell you that the number one problem in Hollywood was and is and always will be pedophilia.
2 words, 2 seconds, and suddenly you understand why certain people in Hollywood have spent years trying to destroy this man's credibility.
In this room are some of the most important TV and film executives in the world, people from every background, but they all have one thing in common. They're all terrified of Ronan Farrow. He's coming for you.
One man said it from a trauma survivor's perspective. The other said it as a joke, standing on the most watched stage in Hollywood. Both of them were telling the exact same truth, and both of them were ignored.
Like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
A comedian, a child star turned activist. Different platforms, different decades, different methods. But here's what nobody is connecting. They were both pointing at the same machine. And that machine has been running in Hollywood for a very, very long time. Here's the thing about truth in Hollywood. It doesn't disappear just because powerful people want it to. It just gets louder. And right now, 2 completely separate voices, one you'd expect, one you absolutely wouldn't, have been saying the same thing for years. Corey Feldman, you already know the name. Child star, one of the most recognizable faces of 1980s cinema. The Goonies, Stand By Me, The Lost Boys, Gremlins. He wasn't just famous, he was a cultural icon before he even hit puberty. And alongside him, his best friend and co-star, Corey Haim. Together, they were the 2 Coreys, teen heartthrobs, box office gold. And behind that, 2 kids being circled by predators who had total access and zero accountability. Ricky Gervais, British comedian, creator of The Office, one of the sharpest satirical minds of his generation, not a victim, not an activist, just a man standing on the Golden Globe stage in front of every major Hollywood executive and power player and choosing very deliberately to say the quiet part loud. These 2 men never collaborated, never sat down together to strategize. But if you lay their public statements side by side, you realize they've been describing the same world, the same culture, the same silence that protected the same people. And now with the Epstein files circling, with the Diddy case making headlines, with the Quiet Onset documentary cracking Nickelodeon open, the world is finally catching up to what both of them already knew. Let's start at the beginning. Because to understand why what they're saying matters so much right now, you have to understand what Hollywood actually was and what it still might be. The 1980s is remembered as the golden age of the child star. And from the outside, it looked exactly like that. Films like E.T. the Extraterrestrial, The Goonies, Stand By Me, these weren't just hits. They were cultural touchstones. Kids were the center of Hollywood's biggest stories, and audiences loved them. But Feldman described something else entirely happening behind that curtain.
The circle of older men, and they all had either their own power or connections to great power that surrounded themselves around this group of kids. And it's widespread.
That word widespread is the one that matters because what Feldman is describing isn't one predator slipping through the cracks. He's describing an entire ecosystem. Agents, managers, producers. The very people who were supposed to be the gatekeepers protecting young talent were instead the ones providing access. They controlled the auditions, the set schedules, the career opportunities. Parents were kept at a distance, convinced that this was just how the industry worked. And kids, too young and too naive to know better, were told the same thing.
Yeah, I was surrounded by them. They were everywhere like vultures.
Feldman was 14. He says he didn't even fully understand what was happening at the time. He didn't have the framework to recognize it. That's not naivety. That's exactly how these systems work. They count on the victim being too young, too dependent, and too isolated to understand or report what's being done to them. And here's the part that sets this apart from just a personal account. Feldman says this wasn't happening in isolation. Other kids were going through the same thing. The same names kept appearing across different stories, different sets, different years. It was, in his own words, a system, an industry-wide infrastructure of access and silence. Now, let's talk about Corey Haim, because this story is ultimately about him. Feldman and Haim became best friends the way that only people who've shared a specific kind of trauma can. When Haim first opened up to Feldman about what happened to him, Feldman realized they'd both been through similar experiences. That shared understanding became the foundation of their friendship. But it also meant they were both carrying the same weight, the same secrets with nowhere to put them. Hayes started drinking during the filming of a movie called Lucas. He was a teenager, and it was on that same film, according to Feldman, that something happened to Hay that would shape the rest of his short life.
As a little boy, and he told me that, it was his co-star. And he told me that it was Charlie Sheen that...
H described exactly how it happened, where it happened, and he didn't just tell Feldman. According to the documentary, H told this story to multiple people across the years. At least a dozen people in their circle had heard the same account directly from Hay. It wasn't a secret he buried. It was a secret nobody around him was brave enough to act on. Common knowledge. Everybody knew and nobody did anything. That sentence is more disturbing than almost anything else in the story because it means the silence wasn't accidental. It was a choice made over and over again by person after person who decided that protecting their own position in the industry mattered more than protecting a child. H's addiction escalated from alcohol to marijuana to crack cocaine. By 18, he was in rehab. He became, in his own words, a chronic relapser. He died on March 10, 2010, at just 38 years old. The official cause of death was pneumonia. Feldman believes, and it's genuinely hard to argue with him, that the childhood trauma and the addiction it triggered were the real cause of death. The paperwork said pneumonia, but the story started on a movie set when Hay was 13. Now, here's where the story shifts. Same Hollywood, different decade, different messenger. When Ricky Gervais hosted the Golden Globes, nobody expected him to do what he did. He stood in front of the most powerful room in the entertainment industry and methodically, joke by joke, told them that he knew exactly who they were.
No position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg.
He wasn't just doing crowd work. Every line was calibrated. He told them not to make political speeches because they had no moral authority to do so. He told them he knew about their behavior. He named Ronan Farrow, the journalist who'd been systematically exposing in the industry, and said every single person in that room was terrified of him. And then he said it.
Looks like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
Your friend, not a criminal, not a predator. Your friend. Ricky Gervais was standing in a room full of people who he was implying had personal relationships with Jeffrey Epstein, and he said it on live television on the most watched award show of the year, and the room went quiet. Now, think about what Corey Feldman was saying almost at the exact same time. In March 2020, just months after that Golden Globes broadcast, Feldman premiered his documentary, My Truth, The Rape of Two Coreys. He'd spent 3 years making it. He'd $1.3 million of his own money. He'd gathered witnesses, compiled accounts, and named names.
It was a circle of older men, and they all had either their own power or connections to great power that surrounded themselves around this group of kids. And it's widespread.
2 men, one with a microphone on a comedy stage, one with a camera and a lifetime of trauma, both pointing at the same thing. A culture of silence so deep and so wide that it required thousands of people to maintain it. And everyone was more comfortable blaming the one person willing to speak than confronting the machinery that made the silence necessary. What happened the night of Feldman's documentary premiere is one of those moments that raises questions without ever definitively answering them. And the questions themselves are the story. 400 people packed into a screening in Los Angeles, standing room only. The plan was to stream the documentary worldwide simultaneous with the premiere. Feldman had been building to this moment for years. 15 minutes in, he came sprinting down the aisle, flanked by security guards. He grabbed the microphone. The website had crashed.
Oh yeah, I was surrounded by them. They were everywhere like vultures.
Was it actually sabotaged, or was it just a traffic overload from too many people trying to tune in at once? Nobody has proven either way. But here's what we do know. A man who had been systematically dismissed, discredited, and pressured to stay silent for years was finally about to show his evidence to the world. And at the exact moment it was supposed to reach millions, it stopped. That's a fact. What caused it is the question. Here's what makes this story bigger than just Feldman or Gervais or H or any single person. It's the pattern. The same names keep appearing across completely separate investigations. Marty Weiss, the talent manager Feldman named as someone who had access to Hay, also shows up in the quiet onset documentary about Nickelodeon. Different network, different decade, same name. Brian Peake, convicted in 2004 for crimes against a child, went to prison, got out, and then was hired on the TV show Anger Management. The production, where, according to sources, that hiring decision came directly from the show's star. This is what men do. A child was told that what was being done to him was normal, that it was expected, that it was the price of doing business. And the people around that child, the agents, the managers, the other adults on set either didn't know or they knew and looked away. Now connect that to the Epstein world. Transcript after transcript, account after account, the same structural language appears. Access, silence, normalization. A network of powerful people who created environments where exploitation could happen and continue happening because everyone with the power to stop it had too much to lose.
In the year 2000, I was taken to Jeffrey Epstein's island while on a photo shoot on a nearby island. Who I saw and what I experienced there was a glimpse into a very dark and disturbing world. Epstein's reach went to the very top of fashion, arts, and entertainment. This did not just happen to underage girls in Florida. In New York City, hundreds of young, ambitious women were abused by.
And now, with the Epstein files on the table, something is happening that makes both Feldman's warnings and Gervais' jokes feel less like history and more like prophecy. Celebrities are leaving, not for vacations, not for work. They're leaving in ways that look a lot like people who know something is coming and are getting out before it arrives. Ellen DeGeneres is in the UK and reportedly cannot be served legal papers because she's overseas. Richard Gere sold his Connecticut estate at a loss. A multimillionaire taking less money than his property was worth because he needed to move quickly. Eva Longoria slashed the price on her Beverly Hills mansion. Rosie O'Donnell moved to Ireland and said publicly she will never return to the United States. Never. That's not a political statement. That's something else. And Senator Chuck Schumer, standing at a podium, issued a direct challenge.
President Trump, what are you trying to hide? If the administration withholds some documents unlawfully, we will know. If they abuse narrow exemptions to hide the truth, we will know. And there will be serious legal and political consequences. This law passed with near unanimous support. The survivors deserve the truth, and the American people are demanding it.
Over 150 people are mentioned in sealed court documents connected to the Epstein case. And somewhere in Hollywood right now, people who know their names are on that list are watching the calendar and making decisions. Feldman has been asked about all of this, about whether the Epstein reckoning gives him hope one by one. That's what he said. Not all at once, not in one explosive revelation. Slowly, case by case, name by name, which is exactly how it's been happening. The Bill Cosby sexual assault cases, the Harvey Weinstein sexual abuse cases, the R. Kelly sexual abuse cases, Quiet on Set, the Diddy case, and now the Epstein files. Let's go back to Gervais for a second because his Golden Globe speech wasn't random. It wasn't shock comedy for the sake of it. If you watch that speech knowing what we know now, it reads like a very specific document. He referenced surviving R. Kelly and leaving Neverland in the same breath as films being nominated for awards. He implied that the people in that room were complicit in covering for people like that. He warned them explicitly not to give speeches about morality because they had none to offer.
Talking of all you perverts, it was a big year. It was a big year for movies. Surviving R. Kelly, Leaving Neverland, Two Popes.
He called them perverts to their faces on live television. And the room laughed nervously because what else could they do? Walking out would be an admission. Confronting him would be an admission. So they laughed and the cameras stayed on their faces and every single one of them knew exactly what he was actually saying.
And what was he saying?
The same thing Feldman had been saying for years. That this industry has a predator problem. That powerful people know about it. That the silence is not passive. It's active. It's chosen. Every single day, people in positions of power choose silence over accountability because the alternative costs them something. Feldman chose differently. It cost him his reputation for decades. He was called crazy, attention-seeking, desperate, washed up, the full arsenal of discrediting language that powerful systems deploy against inconvenient truth-tellers.
They didn't want him saying it.
They spent years making sure he couldn't. And yet here we are. There's one more thread worth pulling here because Feldman and Gervais weren't the only ones trying to signal what was happening. There was a moment years before any of this became front-page news where another Hollywood figure tried to say something.
Yeah, mid-20s.
Right.
The first time I really came over here. I had a whole bunch of weird paranoid suspicions about what the hell was going on because there was a lot of stuff I couldn't understand.
Weird, paranoid suspicions, a lot of stuff he couldn't understand. And then he went quiet. The interview resurfaced years later, and people started reading between the lines. Was he describing the same machine Feldman was describing? Was he sensing the same network as Joe was poking at with his jokes? We don't know for certain, but the pattern here is worth noting. Multiple people across multiple decades kept bumping into something they couldn't fully articulate, and then chose for various reasons to stop talking about it. The ones who didn't stop talking, Feldman being the most persistent example, paid a serious price for it.
So, here's where we are right now.
Corey Feldman has been telling this story for 30 years. He made a documentary that cost him $1.3 million and crashed on its premiere night. He went to the Screen Actors Guild to try to change union rules. He named names on national television while being called a liar to his face. He did all of this because he made a promise to his dead best friend. Golden Rules walked into the most powerful room in Hollywood and told them in the most public way possible that he knew what they were doing, and he didn't care who was in the room. And the Epstein files, with over 150 names and a federal deadline, are about to do something that no individual voice, however brave or persistent, could do alone. Force the documentation into the public record.
There are thousands of people out there, Matt, who have this information.
Why him? Why always him? Because the thousands of other people who had the same information decided that knowing wasn't the same as doing. And for 30 years, Corey Feldman carried the weight of both. Jaw made the same point from the opposite direction. He stood in a room full of people who knew, who by his own implication were personally connected to the very figures now at the center of federal investigations. And he told them to their faces that the jig was up, that Ronan Farrow was coming, that the truth had a momentum now that no amount of industry power could stop.
He was right.
And so was Feldman. And the fact that it took this long, the Epstein files, the Diddy case, the Nickelodeon documentary, a survivor coalition compiling their own list for the world to catch up to what both of them were saying, everything about how this system works and who it protects. The machine runs on silence. And right now, the silence is breaking. So let me ask you this. When you go back and watch Ricky Jao at the Golden Globes, knowing what you know now, does it still look like comedy to you? When you hear Corey Feldman talk about vultures and circles and children who were told that abuse was just part of the job, does that sound like a desperate has been to you? Or does it sound like two people who were telling the truth in the only ways available to them in a world specifically designed to make sure nobody had to listen? The files are coming. The pattern is visible, and the people who spent 30 years calling Corey Feldman crazy are very quiet right now. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know which part of the story hit you the hardest. And more importantly, why do you think it took this long for people to start listening? See you in the next one.